Hello, I'm glad to welcome you all here. My name is Nicholas Terpstra, and I'm with the Toronto Renaissance and Reformation Colloquium, and we're happy to have you as the audience for this presentation that we're putting on together with the Emilio Goto Chair in Italian Studies. The presentation is by Giulia Gaimari here at the University of Bologna. She took her BA and MA at the University of Bologna, as one should, and then completed her PhD at the University of London in 2018. She subsequently held a Wolfson postdoctoral fellowship in humanities at the University College London, and then a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Bologna 2020 to 2022, before joining the Department of Italian Studies here at the University of Toronto as a postdoctoral fellow working on friendship in medieval Italy. She's since been appointed as an assistant professor in Italian Studies here. Gaimari's research interests focus on Dante Alighieri, on the reception of classical moral philosophy, especially Aristotle and Cicero, in late medieval Italy, on medieval encyclopedic and didactic cultures, on civic rhetoric and ideals, and on the history of emotions in the Middle Ages. So she has a lot to keep herself busy over the next 2 years. Her first monograph, Per amore di giustizia, Dante fra diritto, politica e teologia, was published in 2022, and 3 years earlier, she co-edited with Catherine Keane the volume Ethics, Politics, and Justice in Dante. In her work currently, Gaimari is looking at Dante's reception and reuses of Cicero's Laelius de Amicitia, and this forms the basis for her talk tonight, He Who Loved You So, Friendship, Empathy, and Interreligious Dialogue in Dante. Please join me in welcoming Giulia Gaimari.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for having me here. I'm very happy and emotional. Speaking of which, I'm going to surprise you, starting from T.S. Eliot, Thomas Stearns Eliot. So in a talk delivered at the Italian Institute in London in 1950, T.S. Eliot addressed the influence that Dante's writings exerted upon him. In his account, Eliot recognized that his debt towards Dante went beyond simple borrowings and adaptations. Dante did not have a limited impact over him, one that occurred only in a certain moment of his life and poetic development. On the contrary, Eliot believes that from Dante, one learns and keeps learning 2 inextricable lessons. Lessons that concern language and emotions. According to him, being a repository of everything that human beings are capable of feeling, Dante's Commedia is an endless reminder for the poet of the obligation to capture those feelings that people can barely feel because they lack the words for them. So in Eliot's own words, these 2 achievements of Dante are not to be thought of as separate or separable. The task of the poet in making people comprehend the incomprehensible demands immense resources of language. And in developing the language, enriching the meaning of words and showing how much words can do, he is making possible a much greater range of emotion and perception for other men, because it gives them the speech in which more can be expressed. So as a mediating figure between the world of the unknown and the readers, the poet envisioned by Eliot should be the servant of one's own language, as well as the one who gives voice to the width of emotional range, and who does so for the sake of everyone's advancement in perception, understanding, and communication. So almost a decade earlier, in 1941, the analyst historian Lucien Febvre published the article La sensibilité et l'histoire, comment reconstituer la vie affective d'autrui, advocating for a collective study on human sentiments. I'm reading just the last lines. I'm asking for a vast collective investigation to be opened on the fundamental sentiments of men and the forms they take. However, has been recognized by later historians, especially Barbara Rosenwein, Piros Kanegi, and Damian Bouquet, in the post-war decades, Feb's call for a collective enterprise dedicated to the study of feelings remained almost unanswered. In fact, since the depiction of an emotionally childish Middle Ages presented by Johann Huizinga and the theory of the civilizing process advanced by Norbert Elias, Western historiography remained long dominated by a narrative postulating the progressive triumph of reason and discipline over the irrational nature of the emotional life. Exactly as his contemporaries, Fabre conceived emotion as primitive impulses striving for release. In view of this, it seems that Eliot's considerations take a completely different turn. When talking about the importance that Dante's poetry held for him, the American poet acknowledges the urgency of the comprehension and expression of emotions, while recognizing that the role of the poet should be that of providing human beings with the linguistic and cognitive tools that would broaden their affective and intellectual horizon. Unless we want to concede that Eliot's insistence on the importance of naming the inarticulate is indeed a rationalizing posture, his vision does not imply the dichotomy reason-emotion developed within mid-20th century historiography. Above all, I find extremely interesting that this emerges in connection with Dante. As we will see, Dante's engagement with what we now call emotions does involve language, poetry, participation, and knowledge. So since the mid-20th century, much has changed in how emotions are conceived and studied within a variety of academic disciplines. On the one hand, for instance, we can appreciate Martha Nussbaum's view of emotions as judgments of value, as well as the social usefulness she attaches to emotions and to the ability of literature to stimulate empathetic responses that may be of guidance within the rational process of decision-making occurring in judicial and political contexts. On the other hand, historiography has been attempting at finding these theoretical and methodological tools that would help investigate emotions in history. One of these is the notion of emotional community, developed by Barbara Rosenwein in 2002, and it is a notion that helps appraise the socially constructed nature of emotions, as well as the role played by emotional expression in community building. In Rosenwein's own words, emotional community are precisely the same as social communities, families, neighborhoods, parliaments, guilds, but the researcher looking at them seeks above all to uncover systems of feeling. What these communities and the individuals within them define and assess as valuable or harmful to them, the evaluations that they make about others' emotions, the nature of the affective bonds between people that they recognize, and the modes of emotional expression that they expect, encourage, tolerate, and applaud. So as far as the field of Italian studies is concerned, we have started only recently a joint and international reflection on the critical and research possibilities that may result from bringing together literary criticism, affect theory, cultural studies, and the history of emotions. Two recent international meetings testify to the ongoing activity of this collective initiative. The Society for Italian Studies themed conference on affect, emotion, sensation, held at the University of Cambridge in September 2023, and the 5th edition of the International Seminar on Critical Approaches to Dante, held here at U of T in April 2023, dedicated to the discussion of emotions and communities in Dante. So this talk, today's talk, originates within this context and aims to explore Dante's long-standing engagement with the functions and implications of friendship, empathy, and literature, from the Vita Nova's attempts at affective outreach up to the empathetic bonds that initiate the Commedia's journey and that the Commedia itself wants to establish with its readership. I will start from a famous passage in Dante's Commedia. The Commedia is an unfinished prosimetrum that Dante wrote in the early years of his exile, with the aim of providing knowledge to those who could not access it, as well as of defending his own reputation. Deeply concerned with the infamy that could arise from his love poetry, Dante steals the reception of 3 lyrics he wrote at an earlier stage by arguing that the powerful passion expressed in those compositions was not directed towards a woman in the flesh, but towards Lady Philosophy. So with this in mind, let us look at the passage I wish to begin with, Convivio, Book 2, chapter 12, actually. So the slide will be presenting passages in Italian, but I will be reading them in English. So I hope it works for everyone. Here, Dante traces the steps that brought him to the love and the study of philosophy after Beatrice's death. According to this account, he discovered the greatness and sweetness of philosophy thanks to the reading of Boethius' Consolation of Philosophy and Cicero's Laelius on Friendship. When I lost the first delight of my soul, I was pierced by such sorrow that no comfort availed me. So I began to read the book of Boethius, not known by many, in which, while a prisoner and an exile, he had found consolation. And hearing further that Tully had written another book, in which, while discussing friendship, he had addressed words of consolation to Laelius, I set about reading it. And just as it often happens that a man goes looking for silver and apart from his intention finds gold, so I, who sought to console myself, found not only a remedy for my tears, but also the words of authors, sciences, and books. Pondering this, I quickly determined that philosophy was the lady of the authors, sciences, and books was a great thing. And I imagined her fashioned as a gentle lady, and I could not imagine her in any attitude except one of compassion. E non la poteva immaginare in atto alcuno se non misericordioso. So scholarship discussing this passage has usually focused on Dante's self-taught approach, on the nature of his ties to the Florentine convents of Santa Croce, Santa Maria Novella, and Santo Spirito, as the schools of the religious order are traditionally identified, on the identity of the philosophers, philosofanti in the Italian, and on the location of their disputations, on his statement regarding the scarce appreciation of Boethius' work, which was in fact one of the most read of the Middle Ages, and finally, on the fact that his claim about his new love for philosophy fully rewrites an episode of the Vita Nova. Written in the 1290s, again a prosimetrum, the Vita Nova tells the story of a personal maturation, of a poetic evolution, and of a search for authority. Thanks to the encounter with Beatrice, the protagonist and author of the Vita Nova, Dante, discovers the force of selfless love and of selfless praise, which may endure even after death. The last obstacle that Dante faces before appraising anew the exceptional nature of Beatrice and of the love she elicits is a temporary infatuation for a merciful, noble, and beautiful lady, a pietosa donna who takes pity on Dante's painful state of grief caused by Beatrice's loss. So this is precisely the episode fully amended in the Commedia. What the Vita Nova will label, despise, and discard as a wicked and a brief desire becomes in the Convivio an honest and truthful sentiment of love for philosophy, which is later presented as friendship in Ciceronian and Aristotelian terms. What I wish to stress here today is that the story of the Pietosa Donna, as is told both in the Vita Nova and in its Convivio allegorical revision, dramatizes not only Dante's engagement with the ethical problem of directing one's desire towards a new object of love, but also the role, function, and implications of empathy, both among people and between a reader and the work of literature. In fact, in both versions, desire and love spring from compassione and pietà. So the first passage is from the Vita Nova. And I saw at a window a gracious lady, young and exceedingly beautiful, who was looking down at me so compassionately, to judge from her appearance, that all pity seemed to be concentrated in her. And later I said to myself, it must surely be true that with that compassionate lady there is present most noble love. The second passage from the Convivio: as I explained in the preceding book, my second love for philosophy, took its beginning from the compassionate countenance of a lady. So beside this, in the Convivio passage from which I started today, Dante keeps the affective and cognitive dimensions side by side, by depicting Boëthius' consolation and Cicero's Laelius as a merciful medicine for the soul and as a point of entry into a deeper appreciation of learning and knowledge. In other words, Dante seems fully aware of the empathetic power and possibilities of literature in matters of relief, education, as well as authority building, an awareness that emerges as early as the first chapters of the Vita Nova itself. So throughout the fiction of the Vita Nova, Dante stages the search for an audience that would welcome, interpret, and partake in his life experience and poetic gestures, while also recognizing the authority of his voice. For instance, he tells us that he addressed the sonnet A ciascun'alma presa e gentil core, the first to be included in the Vita Nova, to the most famous poets of the time, in order to make them feel what had appeared to him in the dream he had in the aftermath of Beatrice's first greeting. A vision that brought such an anguish to him that he suddenly woke up and resorted to reach out to those who could help unravel its meaning. At that point, my drowsy sleep could not bear the anguish that I felt. It was broken and I awoke. Thinking about what I had seen, I decided to make it feel to many of the famous poets of that time. Proposi di farlo sentire a molti i quali erano famosi trovatori in quel tempo. An overview of the occurrences of the verb sentire within Dante's writings reveals its semantic depth and hybridity, which encompass perceptive, affective, as well as intellectual connotations. In some cases, sentire is used as a technical Aristotelian term referring to the act of seeing, touching, or hearing being sentire, the capacity of the soul to perceive the world through the senses. In other cases, sentire alludes more generally to the intimate and affective life of the subject. For instance, Dante tells us that he sente angoscia, he feels anguish when he's distant from Beatrice, or conversely, that the thought of Beatrice's worth, make him feel a sweet sentiment of love. But I'm very much interested in what follows the first passage, where sentire comes in the picture. So immediately afterwards, Dante tells us that his first act of poetic and empathetic outreach founded his friendship with Guido Cavalcanti. This sonnet, so the first sonnet, Ciascun'alma presa e gentil core, was answered by many who offered a variety of interpretations. Among those who answered was the one I call my best friend. This exchange of sonnets marked the beginning of our friendship. That friendship has to do with affective participation comes to light both in the 13th century encyclopedic tradition conveying Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics and in Cicero's Laelius on friendship. For instance, in the second book of his Trésor, Brunetto Latini, the Florentine intellectual Brunetto Latini, discusses the difference between companionship and friendship. In the footsteps of the Aristotelian source he is translating here, the Summa Alexandrinorum, Brunetto explains that compagnie differs from friendship in as much as friendship entails compassion and humanity of heart. In other words, friendship entails an empathetic bond that goes beyond mere sociability. On a similar note, Cicero conceived friendship as an empathetic bond. Here is the definition. Friendship is nothing other than consensio with benevolence and love about all things, divine and human. Consenso as in feeling together, cum sentire. This is Uguccione da Pisa in his 12th century lexicon. Consensio, consentis, consensum prevere, quasi simul, sentire. Feeling together. After all, in her study on Cicero's vocabulary of emotions, Barbara Rosenwein has indeed stressed that Cicero places value on emotions precisely in the Laelius, where he seems to challenge the Stoic view of apatheia by defending the importance of emotional carefulness that comes with friendship. In Cicero's view, friendship entails emotional involvement, exactly as virtue does. So as you perhaps might imagine, Cicero's notion of friendship became a common adage appearing in a variety of medieval writings. For example, within discussions about the theological virtue of caritas, charity, love, occurring in 13th century preaching manuals. One of these, the Liber de Virtutibus, was probably composed in Florence in the 1290s, so when Dante was there participating into the literary life of his town, by the Franciscan friar Servasanto da Faenza. But we need to go beyond Dante's vocabulary to grasp the scope of his engagement with friendship, empathetic connection, and poetry. In fact, there is another passage in the Vita Nova that shows his interest in a stage search for consensio through the power of words. In Vita Nova 29, Dante imagines to include a group of passing by pilgrims within the collective feeling of grief that pervades the città dolente because of the loss of Beatrice. and he envisions to do so by addressing a sonnet to them. Then I said to myself, I know that if they were from a neighboring town, the pilgrims, they would in some way appear distressed as they passed through the center of the desolated city, Città Dolente. If I could detain them for a while, I know I could make them weep before they left this city, for I would speak words that would make anyone weep who heard them. After they had passed from my sight, I decided to compose a sonnet in which I would reveal what I had said to myself, and to make the effect more pathetic e a ciò che più paresse pietoso, I decided to write it as if I were speaking to them, and I composed this sonnet, A Pilgrims de Peregrini. And perhaps not by chance, this passage is preceded by a consideration about friendship. These pilgrims seem to come from distant parts, and I do not believe that they have ever heard this lady mentioned, Beatrice. They know nothing about her. In fact, their thoughts are centered on other things than what surrounds them. Perhaps they are thinking of their friends far away, whom we do not know, we cannot know. So coming from afar, the pilgrims do not have any knowledge of Beatrice. Their pensive posture might instead indicate that their thoughts are directed towards their own friends, which in turn we do not know. Dante and the pilgrims do belong to different geographical areas and do know their respective bonds of friendship. However, this reciprocal affective distance becomes a sort of common ground that allows Dante's vision of a new, enlarged emotional unity rooted upon the story of Beatrice and on a shared feeling of mourning elicited by his own poetry. In addition to this, it is worth noting that Dante envisions to elicit compassion in the pilgrims immediately after repenting of the affective and moral lapse stemmed from the pietosa donna's compassion. This means that, in his view, apathy does not serve his purposes, so apathy is not in the picture. After all, as Augustine teaches in the Civitate Dei, book 14, Christians going through the pilgrimage of this life do experience emotion, fear, desire, pain, joy, and do experience them in the right way as long as their love is inclined towards God. What is more, according to Augustine, Christians feel emotions not only on their own account, but also with respect to others. They do desire other human beings' salvation, while also fearing that they may perish, and they suffer if they do perish, while rejoicing when they become free. And as Augustine recalled in this same book, Christ himself welcomed human emotions and human empathy, compassion in a convenient manner. For example, when the time of his passion was near, he did feel and express tristizia. And when he was about to resurrect his friend Lazarus, he burst into tears at seeing Lazarus' sister Mary crying at his feet. So it is not a chance that what brings Dante and the pilgrims together is the one of whom Beatrice revived the memory on earth, Christ. As the very opening of Vita Nova 29 reveals, the image of Christ is what links Beatrice in heaven to the pilgrims and to Dante and his city. After this period of distress, during the season when many people go to see the blessed image of Christ that Jesus Christ left us as a visible sign of his most beautiful countenance, which my Lady beholds in glory, it happened that some pilgrims were going down a street which runs through the center of the city where the most gracious Lady was going lived and died. Beatrice's Christological nuances, signs, are at play also at the very beginning of the Commedia, as Christ's harrowing of hell stands in the background of one of the key moments that initiate the journey of Dante the pilgrim, Beatrice's descent into limbo. As Virgil himself relates in the second canto of the Inferno, Beatrice visited limbo to urge him to go to the head of Dante. I was among the ones who are suspended when a lady called me, so blessed and so fair that I implored her to command me. So this is Virgil speaking, capture into Virgil's storytelling, reporting Beatrice's own words, the reader will soon learn that compassion and love lie at the heart of the whole action. It was in fact the Virgin Mary who first felt pity for Dante and who thus elicited pity in God himself, managing to break his harsh judgment. There is a gracious lady in heaven, the Virgin Mary, so moved by pity at his peril, she breaks stern judgment there above and bids me to send you to him. So as you can see, the Italian verb used here is compiangere, which can literally be translated as crying together. That is, to feel sympathy for, to partake in someone's sorrow. Hence, the Virgin's compassion promotes a chain of mercy that, passing through St. Lucy and Beatrice, arrives at Virgil in limbo. The Roman poet that embarks on the narration of his encounter with Beatrice to reassure Dante about the legitimacy of his otherworldly journey has been moved to compassion and prompt to action by the power of Beatrice's speech as well as by her tears, as the following two passages reveal. So in the first, Virgil is about to introduce his flashback story. To free you from this fear, I'll tell you why I came and what I heard when first I felt compassion for you, nel primo punto che di te mi dolve. The second passage closes the curtain on Beatrice's discourse. After she said these things to me, she turned away her tears, now dried with tears, making me more eager to set out. But where are friendship and love in all this? Well, they are center stage. From both the rhetorical and the ideological point of view. Not only Beatrice addresses Dante as l'amico mio e non dell'avventura, my true friend, not a friend of fortune, but St. Lucy urges Beatrice to go and assist Dante by bringing up his love for her and by alluding to the literary celebration of that love as is narrated in the Vita Nova. And said St. Lucy, Beatrice, true praise of God, why do you not have the one who loved you so, that for your sake he left the vulgar herd? Beatrice, loda di Dio vera, che non soccorri quei che t'amò tanto. So as we have seen, the Vita Nova is a story of a selfless, disinterested love, but it is also a story about the force and the implications of empathy. The enlarged mourning community that Dante envisions in the last stages of the narrative is a community whose affective identity is rooted upon Christ's example of friendship and compassion, an example that the miracle of Beatrice helped divulge and rekindle, and that her poet and friend Dante has promised to perpetuate in time with his words of testimony and praise. But the Vita Nova's represented public works also as a mirror that bridges the gap between us, the readers, and the inward world of the character that says I, who guides our gaze from the conflictual dynamics of his subjectivity to the objective value of Beatrice and of his own authorial voice. In other words, through the very act of reading, We are ultimately called to partake in a story that presents itself as truthful and universal. The fiction of the Commedia, on the other hand, encourages the identification between the readers and the character who says I since its very first verses. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura che la dritta via era smarrita. Midway in the journey of our life, I came to myself in a dark wood, for the straight way was lost. As is well known, the shift, this change of pronoun from our to I, stresses the universal nature of Dante the Pilgrim's identity. But at the same time, empathy is what allows his salvific journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven, as we have seen, the compassion and eloquence of a female trinity set in motion a rescue mission that went even beyond the boundaries of religious beliefs. In fact, Virgil's paganism is emphasized as early as Inferno Canto 1, where he makes clear twice his exclusion from the Christian community. Nonetheless, he becomes part of a merciful and eloquent group for the sake of Dante the Pilgrim, the one who in turns read and studied his poetic Virgil's poetic earth with great love. In fact, it is precisely Virgil's poetry, labeled here in the first passage as parlare onesto, noble speech, that makes him suitable for the task Beatrice is entrusting to him. So pietà and parole, poetry and friendship, initiate the Commedia's redemptive journey, which is depicted in the same canto as the struggle of the way and of the pity of it. And what is more, even the very first dialogue between Dante the Pilgrim and Virgil occurs under the aegis of pity, mercy, for the pilgrim's first spoken words are nothing but a plea for mercy. When I saw him in the vast desert, have mercy of me, miserere di me. Whatever you are, I cried, whether shape or living man. So the pervasiveness of pietà within the opening scenes reveals the key role it plays within the didactic and spiritual scope of the poem, a scope that exceeds the margins of the fiction by attempting at stimulating our affective responses in order to direct our own will and our own love towards the true good. More generally, the spectrum of emotions that the Commedia showcases since its very beginning, and that Eliot appraised as one of the most relevant features of Dante's poetry, reveals what Piros Caneghi and Damien Bocquet assumed at the main thesis of their book on medieval sensibilities, that is, that emotion was at the heart of the anthropology of the Western Middle Ages. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Giulia. So I'm not Professor Terpstra, I'm Laelius, and I will take on the Q&A after this wonderful lecture. So does anyone have any questions for Professor Gaimari? Before I begin and shower her with my questions. Please.
There you go, that was very good. I really enjoyed that very much. Oh, I need to speak into that little thing? I'll do
Yes.
that. I guess my question for you, you really set up friendship and this relationship of empathy really well. And it's really stunning to kind of see that, of course, in Virgil kind of at the beginning there. But this idea of pity and misericordia, right? It involves not equals of friends, but an ascent from the higher to the lower. And that seems to be really at the heart of this longing for Beatrice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess where do you fit that descent, that exitus and reditus, that Zen Dionysius that he's certainly aware of there? Like where do you see that squaring within what you kind of set up as kind of more of a egalitarian sense of
Mhm.
empathetic friendship.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks very much. I don't know exactly how to fix these two views or how I can put them side by side, but for sure, the Aristotelian thought may be a point of entry because in Book 8 of the Nicomacheanetic, Aristotle discusses the friendship that may arise from people belonging to different hierarchies. So, for instance, friendship between the subject and the ruler, friendship between the father and the children, and Dante's read the Nicomacheanetic. He's very much aware of this point of the discussion, of Aristotle's discussion about the different, the friendship that may arise between people of different standing, and he uses these Aristotelian considerations to describe his friendship with lady philosophy. So it is something that is very much here and there. And I don't know, I still need to, find a way to keep everything together, if it is even possible, because Dante has a very hybridizing thought, and sometimes it is difficult as a scholar to make every point fit within the whole, and so maybe it is not our scope. I don't know if I have maybe answered this.
I think you're right. It might not be neat and clean.
It's
that
not
they
neat and
harmonize
clean,
together.
yeah.
But if she's going to be this sort of Christ figure, and even to a certain extent Virgil, I mean, this idea of ascent and descent needs to be somehow caught up in this account of friendship, because it's that very thing that draws, Dante from the depths of the Inferno onto the Paradiso, right? So
it's a divine, definitely.
Thank you very much, Giulia. I'm interested in a completely different friendship, and I wonder whether Dante at all talks about that. I'm interested in the idea of the bad friend. Because, of course, I like very much your presentation, and we tend to talk about friends and good friends. It's like what is positive, like what is empathy, what is this, but there is a very strong tradition and a very, very strong idea about, maybe not as strong as the good friend, but what about the bad friend?
How
how
to test them as well.
Yes, and how does it fit in your understanding of what Dante is doing? Does it exist at all? It is something that really I am personally interested in, because we have the book Compagno da Signa, we have all sorts of things about so
and Cicero as well, part of the Laelius is about flatterers, how to test good friends and those who just flatter you. Yes, the critical problem is with Guido Cavalcanti's friendship with Guido Cavalcanti is very much debated in scholarship point, because on the one hand, the Vita Nova is dedicated to Guido and celebrates the friendship with Guido, but within the Vita Nova itself, Dante presents himself as someone who is overcoming Guido himself, Guido's poetry, Guido's own conception of love, which is completely different from the love celebrated in the Vita Nova. So the bad friend is something that comes into the picture within this relationship, but it's a very entangled, complex point of the critical tradition on Dante's also intertextual relations with with Guido. So I don't know whether I haven't found like in the text. So for example, in the Vita Nova, references to like conceptual the concept of the bad friend, but for sure, Dante is thinking about that in relation to Guido.
And just to say something about the descent ascent, it's not. I'm not thinking of in these terms, but there is a very very strong tradition in the Middle Ages, in the Latin Middle Ages, about the spiritual friendship. I mean, we have treatise upon treatise about the Amicitia spirituali,
Yeah.
and there really the relationship between how can you be a friend of God? What does it entail? What does it mean? Albert Rivaux and all of these people. So I think that maybe a little bit more of this discussion about the spiritual friendship could be brought into your thinking, because it really brings. I mean, Dante is a medieval person.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So we cannot just make him into a Ciceronian,
Of course.
because he's not.
Of course.
I'm pretty sure that him being as wide read as he is, he knew the medieval theory of friendship, which is not only Ciceronian, but also
Aristotelian, Ciceronian, as well as monastic. In fact, one passages I did not discuss, I did not bring out here. It's Albert of Rivaux' definition of consensio. So the Ciceronian definition of consensio occurs in the Amicitia Spiritali, and he accompanies with a quotation from the Act of the Apostle, where the first Christian community is depicted as having one heart and one soul. So according to the tradition, the monastic tradition, he represents Ciceronian consensio is understood in terms of the one soul and the one heart of the first Christian community, animated by the works of the apostle. I was interested in this syncretism between Cicero and the gospel appearing in the De Amicitia Spiritali, for instance. So I'm going there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one, if I may ask. So every time you speak about consensio, the first word that comes to my mind is concordia. And so I always think of the connection between this sort of like type of emotional bond and the influence or effects that those emotional bonds may have into the political life of what Dante was living in. And so I wanted to ask you whether that type of political effect has a place in your argument, and whether you are thinking of what emotion does to the spaces, political spaces that Dante was inhabiting.
Thank you for the question. So the conception of concordia does not have a space in this argument, but the affectivity of Dante's political thought is something I delved into in the past. So I did engage with Dante's conception of loving justice, or love and justice, or of applying justice by loving the other and by loving God. So it is something, the affective and the political is of course something that is there. It is present in Dante's writings, it is present in Dante's Florentine context, and also I would say Italian context when he's in exile. But in this argument, I haven't found a place yet for that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So thank you first of all for this wonderful lecture. I won't go into the content because, we're just learning. But I wanted to ask how we're going through a big kind of shift also in the way we teach and what we teach. We don't have a vacuum, so what we teach obviously is connected to the events we experience outside the classroom. And so in relation to Dante, there is this new scholarship and new authors who are trying to rejuvenate or reconsider Dante in different perspectives as I think about what Laura is doing, So I've seen recently Dante and post-colonial studies, something I never thought about. So I wanted to know, because you teach Dante, have you thought about this? How, or have you noticed any pedagogical reflections that you were forced to do in order to be able to teach the scholarship in 2023?
Thank you for your question, which is a broad one. Yes, I'm interested in this new stream of scholarship, and thanks to Laura Gallinella and Catherine Adoyo, last year I took part in a fantastic great panel at the NEMLA about decolonizing Dante, and for that panel I tried to work on the concept of medieval tolerance, toleration, and whether these concepts, which are well studied and developed within historiography, historical studies, whether I can apply to this concept of Dante's representation of limbo, where he celebrates, if we want, people, souls coming from different geographical areas and religious beliefs. So it's something I'm very much interested in, and I'm trying to follow this line of study. As far as teaching is concerned, it didn't happen to me so far to speak about this interests of mine to my students. But I, for example, a student came to me who wanted to. Is interested in developing an essay on medieval art, medieval representations of the afterlives, and Dante's own representations. And the first essay I suggested him to read is one by Teodolinda Barolini, which is about, she argues that Dante has a non-stereotypical imagination in relation to sexualized others, racial others. So it was very, and he found that very stimulating. So it was very interesting for me to begin this exchange with this student that found this new piece of scholarship useful and interesting for his own interest, research interest. You're welcome.
Any other questions? I will go in the meantime, so no worries about that. So a follow-up that is related, I guess, tangentially to the questions that were asked before about the certain possible imbalances in these affective networks. Mm-hmm. Is there any, in the work that you've been doing on the Vita Nova and the Commedia, have you found any gendered groups of emotions? So emotions that are more predominantly gendered than others? Or is Dante being non-stereotypical in his work, attributing ranges of emotions to all kinds of characters regardless of their identity?
Yeah, that's a very, very challenging question. So, first answer would be yes, women are the ones who feel compassion the most. And in fact, this is the argument of Sarah McNamara, who wrote about the invention of compassion in the Middle Ages. So it was something for women, especially. And it was a feeling stimulated by devotional literature, thought written for women. So first answer, maybe straightforward would be that. But I think that he might be no stereotypical in this respect, because he tried to foster compassion and empathy within a male group of readers and poets in the very beginning of the Vita Nova. Then he tries to address a group of pilgrims. We don't know anything about the gender of these unknown people traversing Florence. And then the one thing that strikes me is its Virgil's compassion. I mean, the capacity of this female trinity to elicit compassion in a pagan poet. And so in Inferno 1, his paganism is very much stressed. So, and his capacity to feel compassion, it was something that I found interesting.
Thank you very much, Giulia, and thank you to the audience. We ran out of time for the Q&A, so one last round of applause for our speakers. Now it's time for us to move downstairs where we will have the following up of the reception. Thank you.
Thanks.